Philip Falcone ran a hedge fund called Harbinger Capital. At its peak in the 2000s, the company was managing upwards of $25 billion after being part of the big short bet that cashed in when the housing bubble burst. Today, his LinkedIn page says that he's CEO of something called Blockchain TV. And when his personal chef won a judgment against him, Falcone said that he didn't have the money. It goes almost without saying then that this is a guy who knows how to make money, but he also knows how to lose it. And as you'd expect, this means he doesn't really worry about little things like laws. In 2012, the SEC charged Falcone with fraud. There wasn't any one illegal thing he'd done. Instead, it was just a smorgasbord of crimes. The director of the SEC's enforcement division wrote, quote, "Today's charges read like the final exam in a graduate school course in how to operate a hedge fund unlawfully." Most of it looked pretty bad, but today we're talking about one of those charges that makes him maybe look like a hero, because when you go against Goldman Sachs, what else can you be? This is the story of the one-man short squeeze that never squoze. It's early 2006, and one of the analysts at Harbinger Capital tells Falcone he thinks it's a good idea to invest in the bonds of a company called Max Holdings. The company has two tiers of debt, and Falcone decides to go for the more risky one. Max sells mostly bathroom fixtures. At one point, they were the largest seller of shower units in Canada and third in the US. Harbinger is able to buy their risky bonds for more than half off the face value because there's worries about the housing bubble. The bet this is 2006, remember, is that things are going to get better rather than worse going forward. Obviously, at some point, Falcone reversed this and made all the money in subprime, but not on this day. They buy a lot of these bonds. They end up owning 63% of the entire issuance by the end of the summer, with their purchases pushing the price up from the 30s into the 50s. At that point, Harbinger took a break from buying. Maybe they would have been done, but one of their analysts heard a rumor. Just as Harbinger had been aggressively buying up these bonds, there was an aggressive short seller. And what made it even worse was that it appeared to be Harbinger's prime broker, Goldman Sachs. Prime brokers provide a special group of services to their clients, things like lending of securities, helping them execute their trades, managing their cash. Basically, it's like your financial butler. But in this case, the financial butler, they're not only acting in a way that didn't necessarily have Harbinger's best interest in mind, they were encouraging their other clients to make the trade too. And they were very likely lending out Harbinger's own bonds to allow these people to do the shorting. The trade was a little bit more complicated as Goldman's shorting of the Harbinger position was a hedge paired with the purchase of the less risky, higher tier Max bonds. So it was more like a convergence trade than just a bet on the company going bankrupt. But ultimately, the key part is that they're shorting bonds that Harbinger and Falcone own. And this makes Falcone mad. His first move is to ask Goldman not to lend out the bonds. Then he decides he just can't trust them, and he moves the bonds to another broker. This is just the beginning, though. He was mad, and now he's going to try to get even. In September, he orders his trader to start purchasing bonds again. They make purchases throughout the fall until they own another 65 million. These are purchased in the high 30 to low 40 range. By the end of October, Harbinger owns a position in Max bonds with a face value of 174 million. It's a notable amount because the issuance was only for 170 million. This means Falcone has amassed more than the entire population of these bonds. This is possible to do because of naked shorting. In other words, rather than finding shares to borrow before going short, the short seller just goes for it and assumes that when they need to, they'll be able to find the bonds to deliver to the buyer. In the world of stocks, this is illegal, but you can sell bonds naked as much as you want. There's no issue with it. So the shorts haven't broken any rules, but that's not their problem. Their problem is Falcone appears to have them cornered. There's a rumor of Harbinger's plan circulating on a bond news publication called Debtwire, but no one knows besides Falcone and company what exactly the situation is. Next, Harbinger moves its position out of the brokerage that it had gone to after Goldman into a bank, eliminating all possibility that there's going to be a broker that can lend these shares out. The noose is tightening at this point, but the crazy thing is Falcone tells his trader, just keep buying. Their buying pushes the price up into the 50s. As this is happening, the shorts are failing to deliver the bonds to Harbinger at settlement. Goldman is short 21.5 million bonds that they've failed to deliver to Harbinger, and their clients who they've put onto the trade are short several million more. So basically, Harbinger's making these purchases. They're saying, okay, like, give us the actual shares so we can put them away into our bank. And Goldman's saying, like, well, you got to give us some time to actually find them. Someone is still trying to short, though, because shares are still magically appearing for Harbinger to buy. They begin 2007 holding a position equal to 113% of the original issuance. The price for the bonds at this point peak in the 80s, which is more than the less risky bonds of Max Holding. The market is really broken at this point. There's isn't something that should happen. At the same time, the U.S. housing bubble is clearly bursting, and Harbinger writes down the value of the bonds on its balance sheet to 55. Throughout the spring, Falcone and Harbinger pressure Goldman. They keep calling him up saying, hey, we bought these. Where's our actual bonds? At one point, a trader from Goldman contacts Harbinger and asks, can we purchase some of them from you? And Harbinger says, sure, you can buy as many as you want for 100. Goldman says, no thanks, that's just way out of whack with what we think they're worth. In the summer, Harbinger sells a small lot of 700,000 bonds at 95 to a non-Goldman fund. But at the same time, they're still writing down the value of the shares on their balance sheet, now all the way down to 40. So this is back and forth keeps going on when Harbinger keeps telling Goldman, like, hey, it's been months now. You really need to deliver these shares. Like, we own them on paper, but we want the full title. Gets up to the point where senior management at Goldman is now involved, because this is not a good look for them, aside from the fact that it seems like they're going to lose a bunch of money on the trade. So they get compliance and legal involved and prepare to call Falcone. They need to be convinced, they say, that the $100 per bond that they're being told they have to pay makes sense. Otherwise, it's market manipulation and they don't want any part in it. And this is kind of what makes Goldman so genius, right? A normal person would be under pressure and they'd probably just cave, but Goldman has the legal team to come up with this excuse that says, like, we don't have to be squeezed by you because the squeezing is illegal. On the call, Falcone tells them he's now willing to accept a price of 105. Obviously, they didn't like 100, they don't like 105 either, and they don't like the justification he tries to give them about how 105 could be a naturally occurring price. The riskier bonds could actually be worth more. Then the fireworks happen. The Goldman team basically complains they can't find any bonds. We want to make you whole, and we're also not buying yours at 105 because the reasoning you're giving us is just insane. They ask, what do you do? And Falcone says, I guess you should just keep bidding. And then he explains to them, guys, quote, sometimes you're just on the wrong side of a trade. While explaining to them how screwed they are, Falcone mentions that he knows, due to all the shorting going on, that there's a long position greater than the entire size of the issuance out there. Someone from Goldman says, quote, how could you possibly know that? And Falcone finally makes the big reveal, and he says, I'm the big position. And it's me, I'm the problem, it's me. According to the SEC report, at that point, quote, the senior officer and other Goldman personnel were stunned. But they're Goldman, and they tell Falcone, all right, now it's for sure. This is a manipulated market. We're just not playing. And Falcone seems to have overplayed his hand because nothing is happening. He goes back and he tries to, save Max, because maybe if the company survives, then the bonds will have value outside of this squeeze he set up. But all the plans that get presented to him don't make any sense, so he doesn't go forward with them. One of the reasons Goldman said they wouldn't participate, besides just the price itself, was that if he controlled the whole thing, it was a cornered market. So he offloads a chunk of his position and then calls Goldman and says, hey, I don't own the whole thing anymore, so now, will you start buying these from me? And they go, okay, who'd you sell it to? and he refuses to tell them. So they still say, well, then it's not a competitive market if you're the only buyer that anyone knows about. And it probably was a legit complaint by Goldman at that point, because it really seemed like might have been a related party transaction. In January of 2008, Harbinger sells a small amount of the position in the 60s, some of it to Goldman. But then Goldman finds out that Harbinger was on the other side of the trade. They say, we're not buying any more here. It's still a manipulated market. They cite that there are legal risks involved of them participating. And then a few months later, with the terms not disclosed anywhere in the SEC report, there's some sort of settlement reached between the two. In 2012, the SEC brings their suit. Harbinger and Falcone are charged with market manipulation, a case that seems pretty straightforward. The test for manipulation is that you made purchases solely for the purpose of creating and taking advantage of an artificial price. The initial purchases obviously were in good faith, but then Harbinger kept buying, even at the same time as saying on the balance sheet that these are falling further and further in value. What was new about this case is that Falcone and Harbinger had to admit guilt. We were in the post-financial crisis era, and the SEC was a little bit tougher than it had been before that. Literally, nobody from the banks that caused the Great Recession ever admitted guilt, but Philip Falcone did, all because he tried to get revenge on the great vampire squid known as Goldman Sachs. Thanks for watching, guys.